Today, on Issue at Hand, the fundamental difference between the way Marvel and DC handle continuity. The answer to questions like, why are there so many different versions of Kara Zor-El, and what, another DC reboot? Again? This is Issue at Hand, Polygon's new video series about the weird world of comics. I'm Susana Polo, Polygon's entertainment editor, resident comic book expert, and your host. And today I'm going to explain
the DC Multiverse.
In 1956, DC Comics had been publishing superhero stories for almost 20 years. Batman and Superman were chugging along just fine, but some heroes weren't. No, not those guys. These guys. The original Flash, Green Lantern, and the Atom. Writer Robert Kanigher and artist Carmine Infantino decided to experiment with the Flash. They kept his powers and name, but gave him a new origin story and a new secret identity as Barry Allen, a perpetually tardy forensic scientist. And as you might have guessed,
my name is Barry Allen, and I am the fastest man alive.
Barry Allen as the Flash took off. The revamp was so successful that DC gave Green Lantern and the Atom the same treatment. Now, it's important to stress that this was the first time a superhero had ever undergone what we would today call a reboot. DC was telling readers that Jay Garrick, the original Flash, no longer existed in their universe. In fact, he'd never existed, and instead Barry Allen was in his place. In fact, had always been in his place. These first superhero reboots marked the end of the Golden Age and the beginning of the Silver Age, the second distinct era of superhero comics. But there's another important distinction between the Golden Age and the Silver Age. The Silver Age was the first era where the people making superhero stories were the people who'd grown up reading superhero stories. Those creators couldn't help but still really like the old versions of those characters. They were the characters that had made them fall in love with superheroes in the first place. Those competing forces, retroactive continuity changes and nostalgia, were the laboratory chemicals and lightning of the chain reaction that spawned the DC Multiverse. 5 years after Jay Garrick was replaced by Barry Allen, he reappeared in the DC universe. The Flash of Two Worlds revealed that Jay and the other original DC heroes still existed in a parallel universe known as Earth 2. A new cosmology was fleshed out. Earth 1 had the Justice League and Earth 2 had the Justice Society, made up of DC's Golden Age characters. The first crossover team-up between the characters was such a hit that DC wound up making it an annual event. This multiverse would become the standard explanation for how all of DC Comics' characters could exist in the same universe, even if their backstory directly contradicted the main setting. And they did contradict a lot, partly because of the company's long history of buying up characters from other companies and incorporating them into the multiverse. In 1986, 30 years after Flash of Two Worlds, DC's number of parallel universes was reaching critical mass. Also, it was 30 years after Flash of Two Worlds and the company wanted to do something special for the anniversary. That special something was
Crisis on Infinite Earths.
The story of Crisis on Infinite Earths is simple. A previously unknown existential threat to the universe called the Anti-Monitor arises, and the sheer cosmic energies of its battle against all the heroes and villains of DC's many parallel Earths tears the multiverse asunder. The Anti-Monitor was created when an Owen, those are the little blue guys who give the Green Lanterns their power, invented a machine that would allow him to observe the beginning of the universe. And in a comic book twist on the Observer effect, the mere act of watching the beginning of the universe caused it to splinter into an infinite multiverse at the moment of its creation. And from that reaction, the Anti-Monitor was born. Before the Anti-Monitor could be stopped, he had already devoured all of the parallel worlds of the multiverse except for 5. The Anti-Monitor's final battle, with the combined forces of all the remaining heroes and villains, destroyed the multiverse entirely and remade those 5 parallel worlds into one. The DC Multiverse was now just a universe. The characters of those 5 Earths coexisted now, and they always had. And in an era when character deaths were way more rare and far more permanent, Crisis on Infinite Earths famously contained 2 major ones, that of Supergirl and that of Barry Allen, the very character whose creation had led to the DC Multiverse in the first place. To sum up, let's reboot an earlier part of this video. It's important to stress that this was the first time a superhero universe had ever undergone what we would today call a reboot. Crisis on Infinite Earths was telling readers that the pre-Crisis multiverse no longer existed. In fact, it had never existed, and instead the post-Crisis universe was, and had always been, in its place. Except instead of a handful of characters in the 1950s, it was
an entire fictional universe.
It was an unprecedented storyline, an unprecedented crossover, and an unprecedented event in comic history. Editorially, Crisis on Infinite Earths served a similar purpose as it did within the fiction. It put all of DC's biggest and brightest characters into one setting with a streamlined timeline. There's a good reason why a lot of what we consider to be quintessential to Batman, to pick just one example, dates back to comics from the late 80s. Crisis allowed DC to discard what was no longer relevant to modern audiences and emphasize what was. And in that way, it made the DC Universe easy to understand for new readers and avoided spawning a whole series of reboot after reboot. And the DC Universe has never become a complicated multiverse since either. Everything was great and easy to explain for... I'm sorry, I'm getting word that in fact none of that is true, and the DC Universe did indeed engage in significant resets of its continuity in 1994, 2005, and a complete reboot in 2011. And in 2007 it was also converted into a multiverse consisting of 52 parallel Earths. I suppose in the end, the Anti-Monitor was nothing compared to the forces of nostalgia and retcons. But I'm not going to walk you through the DCU's post-crisis patch history in this video. I'm going to do it in our next installment of Issue at Hand, where we'll discover the history of the DC Universe through two very different characters. Supergirl, who is Superman's cousin, Kara Zor-El, and Power Girl, who is also Superman's cousin, Kara Zor-El.
Wait, so why did the Anti-Monitor want to devour the multiverse? I don't get it.
It's because he'd already conquered the antimatter universe from his home planet of Quard, so for every DC parallel Earth that he destroyed, the antimatter universe grew and proportionally, and so did his power. Like, it's just because he was a bad guy, Tara.
Okay.